Right, let's kick off this explainer with a completely bizarre event from 1995. Picture this. A guy decides to rob not one, but two Pittsburgh banks in broad daylight. And we're talking absolutely no mask, no disguise, literally nothing. In fact, he looks right up at the security cameras and just smiles. Well, the police easily tracked him down that exact same night, and when they finally showed him the security footage, he was genuinely, just entirely shocked.
He just kept repeating that one sentence. But I wore the juice. The guy, MacArthur Wheeler, had actually rubbed lemon juice all over his face before the robberies. Why? Because he was 100% convinced that lemon juice made him invisible to security cameras. You know, kind of like invisible ink. He'd even tested it at home with a Polaroid camera first, a test that only worked because he likely just aimed the camera wrong. But this wild story, and Wheeler's absolute unwavering certainty, eventually landed on the desk of a psychologist at Cornell named David Dunning.
Now, Dunning wasn't so much interested in the whole lemon juice thing. What totally fascinated him was the thief's profound confidence. I mean, Wheeler wasn't nervous, he wasn't unsure, he was perfectly certain he was invisible. And this sparked a massive scientific inquiry into why our own brains actively hide our blind spots from us, which eventually led to one of the most famous studies in the history of psychology. So, let's move to Section 1, the dual burden trap, why blind spots stay hidden.
To really understand this trap, we have to look at the landmark 1999 experiment designed by David Dunning and his student Dunning-Kruger. They gave people a series of rigorous tests, grammar, logic, and a humor test where professional comedians rated jokes to see if regular people could actually tell what was funny. After each test, they asked the participants one simple question. Compared to everybody else in the room, how well do you think you did? And this brilliantly illustrates the whole disconnect. Take a look at the people who are at the very bottom of the logic test. Their actual score placed them in the 12th percentile. That means almost 9 out of 10 people in the room completely beat them. But when asked to rank themselves, they guessed they were in the 62nd percentile. They missed their self-assessment by a staggering 50 points, genuinely believing they were above average while they were actively failing the test.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, they were just bragging to save face, right? Well, in later studies, researchers offered subjects up to $100 just to rate themselves accurately. Even with real, actual money on the line, they still couldn't do it. They weren't lying to look good. They literally could not see their own ineptitude.
So the crucial point here is the mechanism behind this blindness, which Dunning and Kruger called the dual burden. To judge how good you are at grammar, you need to actually understand grammar. But if you understood grammar, your sentence wouldn't be broken in the first place. Your error detector is built from the exact same knowledge you are currently missing. It's literally like trying to figure out if a ruler is broken by measuring it with that exact same broken ruler. From the inside, being completely wrong feels absolutely identical to being right. There is no internal alarm going off.
But here's the real twist buried inside that 1999 study, and it reveals so much about how we learn. Dunning and Kruger took those absolute worst performers and split them up. One group got a short logic training packet, just a few minutes of learning actual logic. The untrained group, they remained totally blind and confidently above average. But the trained group actually got better at the skill, and as they did, their confidence dropped. Their self-ranking fell from the 55th all the way down to the 44th percentile. It basically proved that learning creates vital self-awareness. Knowledge is actually the very thing that creates doubt.
Which brings us to Section 2, the fake mountain. And honestly, one of the internet's biggest ironies.
I kind of have to burst your bubble here about how this effect is usually talked about online. You have very likely seen that famous graph mapping confidence against knowledge, the one featuring a giant, dramatic spike right at the beginning labeled Mount Stupid, followed by a massive crash into a valley of despair. Well, I need you to know that this graph is entirely fake. That dramatic spike appears absolutely nowhere in Dunning and Kruger's research, not in 1999, literally not ever.
It's actually wild when you look at the timeline of how this happened. So the original paper drops in 1999. Then sometime in the 2000s, an internet joke, partly originating from a webcomic, introduced that fake Mount Stupid graph. And it went incredibly viral. Millions of people confidently shared a totally fabricated graph about overconfidence without ever once checking if it was real science. For years, people even debated if the whole Dunning-Kruger effect was just some statistical illusion, until a massive 2021 study finally stepped in and settled the science. That 2021 study, published in Nature Human Behavior, tested around 4,000 people using modern, really rigorous methods to rule out any statistical tricks. And the verdict? The effect is entirely real, but it doesn't look like a cartoonish mountain at all. The internet meme got the shape completely wrong. In actual science, low performers genuinely are worse at knowing when they are right or wrong, but the blind spot is way more like a thick fog that just gets denser and denser the less you know.
All right, on to Section 3, the zipper test, finding your own blind spot.
Okay, now that we understand the science, I'm going to prove to you that this blind spot is sitting right there in your head, right now, in the next 30 seconds. Think about a basic zipper. You've used one your entire life. On a scale of 1 to 7, how well do you understand exactly how it works? Lock in your number mentally right now. Most people, without any hesitation, confidently rate themselves a 5 or a 6 on this everyday item.
Got your number? Great. Now, I want you to try to actually explain it out loud, step by step. What exactly do the teeth do? What is happening inside that tiny little slider that actually forces them to lock together? And mechanically, how does pulling it down separate them again? That awkward little mental silence you're feeling right now, that complete inability to articulate the mechanics, that is exactly the phenomenon we're talking about.
It turns out 2 Yale researchers discovered this exact thing back in 2002 and called it the illusion of explanatory depth. They asked people to explain zippers, toilets, locks, speedometers, and almost everyone rated their initial understanding really high, completely failed the verbal explanation, and then quietly re-rated their own understanding way lower. We just constantly confuse being familiar with something with actually understanding how it works.
Now, zippers are harmless, but we do this with incredibly complex topics too. Politics, health, the economy. A fascinating 2019 study surveyed over 2,000 people about genetically modified food. They tested both their claimed knowledge and their actual scientific knowledge. The results were pretty stunning. The most extreme opponents claimed the highest level of scientific knowledge, but they scored the absolute lowest on the actual tests. Literally, the less they knew, the more certain they became.
And honestly, here is the number that should probably haunt you a little bit. 0.29. Across dozens of meta-analyses, people's self-ratings correlate with their actual measured abilities at only about 0.29. That's an incredibly weak correlation. It basically means that the feeling of confidence in your mind is one of the worst possible signals of actual competence. So why on earth don't we just listen and update our views when someone corrects us? Well, it's because of something called self-integrity protection. When feedback challenges you, your brain doesn't just process being wrong as new information, it actually perceives it as a personal threat. It defends your image as a smart person, pushing you to dismiss the correction entirely. Now, drop this very human tendency into social media, a machine that literally rewards confident absolutes with likes and shares instead of nuance, and the fog of overconfidence gets amplified on a massive global scale. Let's wrap up with Section 4, Curing the Blind Spot. How to defeat false confidence. David Dunning makes one thing crystal clear, and he repeats it often. This effect is not about those other stupid people. It is highly domain-specific math, and it applies to absolutely every single one of us. You, me, the top experts, we are all blindly confident somewhere, sitting at the bottom of some chart with no internal warning light going off. So how do we actually combat this invisible trap? Well, the research gives us 3 really clear steps. First, use that explanation test on yourself before you argue. Force yourself to explain the step-by-step mechanics of your opinion, just like we did with the zipper. Second, treat instant, frictionless certainty as a symptom of distance, not a signal of mastery. Real understanding always has texture and exceptions. And third, build actual skill. Remember the training study? Acquiring real knowledge is the only thing that cures the blind spot, because it repairs your internal error detector. The ultimate defense against walking around wearing metaphorical lemon juice is realizing that doubt is actually something you have to earn. To say "I don't know" isn't the sound of a weak mind. Statistically speaking, it's the sound of a mind that is actually working, processing, and navigating the sheer complexity of reality. So, as we finish up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on for some self-reflection. Think back. What is one thing you were completely, confidently wrong about? And what did that exact moment feel like when you finally found out the truth? Sit with that feeling for a minute, because recognizing that deeply uncomfortable moment of realization is the very first step to truly understanding the invisible patterns running your own mind. Thanks for joining me today, and hey, keep questioning your certainties.